Doctor Who spin-offs have been a hot topic since honestly forever, but discussion of them has only ramped up with Russell T Davies coming back and outright saying he wants to create a Doctor Who universe similar to what he had in the early 2000s, as well as the somewhat recent announcement that Doctor Who will be streaming on Disney Plus internationally, potentially affording the show much more budget than it has ever enjoyed previously. And naturally, with the success of franchises like Marvel and Star Wars, many fans have postulated the idea of connected spin-offs to the main show on a more permanent basis for Doctor Who. I wanted to throw my hat into the ring and give you my 5 pitches for Doctor Who spin-offs that I believe the BBC should make if spin-offs are indeed on the table. But before we get into it, if you could do me a teeny tiny little favour and click that subscribe button. We've just hit 17,600 and we're trying to get to 20,000 by the end of the year, so any support would be greatly appreciated on that front. I also have a Twitter and Instagram, which you can follow in the link in the description below if you'd like. But with that said, let's get into the video. So with each of my spin-offs, I'm hoping to satisfy different demographics. So the different demographics I'm aiming for are classic Doctor Who fans, new series Doctor Who fans, mature audiences, a more child-orientated audience, and a teenage-oriented audience. As I wanted to basically cover all sectors so that like in, the early 2000s with Sarah Jane Adventures and Torchwood, you'd have a Doctor Who property to appeal to all sectors of not only the current Doctor Who fan base, but also potentially new people. Starting off with my classic Who pitch, I don't think this will be a surprise to anyone. You've seen him on the thumbnail. It's a Paul McGann 8th Doctor spin-off. I mean, come on, of course it was. People have been crying out for years for an 8th Doctor spin-off, seeing as he only got one televised movie, and these calls have only ramped up in the years since, with his appearances on Big Finish, as well as televised appearances in both Night of the Doctor and Power of the Doctor respectively. And I wholeheartedly agree. Paul still looks the part, he'd still kill it, and I genuinely think there's a lot of potential in an 8th Doctor spin-off for TV. Now I know that Big Finish have obviously done a lot of perhaps the spin-off ideas, but for the sake of this whole video, I'm kind of going to discard what Big Finish do because personally, it makes it a lot easier for me to come up with my own ideas for this sort of thing, but I might take inspiration from certain things that other expanded media pieces will do, and we'll get onto that in a sec. But my idea for an 8th Doctor spin-off would basically be to set it with tensions rising, but the Time War itself hasn't in fact broken out yet. This affords two things. This affords Paul McGann the opportunity to do not only some fun adventures, but also get involved in, the Time War a little bit. But it also just is easier on the budget, because obviously, even though we're assuming we might have more budget going forward, I still imagine that, the BBC will like to cost cut anywhere they can. So by having it set just before the Time War starts, but with tensions escalating, you allow it to act as a bridge between Classic Who and New Who, whilst also not straining the wallet too much. I guess what I'm saying is that this series would kind of act as like the Star Wars prequels for Doctor Who, where we get to see a lot of what would later sort of transpire during the Time War and stuff. I'd personally love to see a return of the McGann console room, or maybe at least like an evolution of that into the War Doctors one or something like that. I think his costume as well should sort of be in between his sort of TV movie look and his Night of the Doctor look. Perhaps he gets scruffier and scruffier across the series. And I also think maybe if this series ran for 1 or 2 series, it should culminate in a big climactic finale, ushering in the beginning of the Time War. You could even have him sent out on missions by the Time Lords on occasion, just like in things like the expanded War Games media, so that the series has some sense of direction and greater threat. Obviously, along with the Time War itself, the Time Lords can also be sort of like, hey, go do this, which we've seen them do in things like Genesis of the Daleks. Personally, I just think this spin-off makes all the sense in the world. Please, BBC, if you make spin-off, make Paul McGann a show. He deserves it so much. So that's the Classic Who spin-off. Next, I want to talk a little bit about my child-centric spin-off, and I want to talk about the adventures of Ace McShane. Once again, I'm not breaking any boundaries with this one. Many people have suggested an Ace spin-off, particularly one that is in the mould of the Sarah Jane Adventures. I do think there are a couple of interesting ways you can differentiate an Ace spin-off from the Sarah Jane Adventures, though. Sarah Jane, in her TV incarnation, was very much kind of closed off to the idea of interacting with people and was very reserved and protective over the people that she watched. And obviously, Ace could have some of those qualities too, but I think Ace should kind of be the opposite to Sarah Jane, where Sarah Jane is sort of too reserved and unwilling to let people into her personal life. Ace is the opposite, perhaps too recklessly allowing, kids to get involved in her various hijinks as she fights different aliens and monsters that come down to Earth. And her lesson would be to become a bit more responsible across the series. This would kind of fit with how we've seen Ace before, is obviously now she would be an older woman. She might still have some of those childlike qualities in her. Obviously, I'm not saying she would just completely act like a teenager, but you get what I'm saying. Like, she'd have that Ace spirit, but, you know, slowly learn that, okay, we maybe need to, you know, not go in guns blazing all the time, and maybe we could take a step back. Because Sarah Jane never really liked weapons, whereas Ace, on the other hand, loves them. So I think you could kind of have a neat reversal there. We also know through things like Farewell Sarah Jane that Ace apparently has K9 as well, so she makes the most sense as a child-orientated spin-off. I'd have the base of operations be Ace's company, Charitable Earth. I think that makes sense. Sarah Jane even mentioned it in Death of the Doctor. Plus, I think you can have some really cool high-tech alien gear in there. And apparently, according to At Childhood's End, it's situated right by Unit as well, so perhaps that might also afford the opportunity for Unit to appear in a couple episodes. You could even use the narrative framing device that the kids that she recruits to help her on her various adventures are interns at a Charitable Earth, or something like that. Sophie Aldred herself also has plenty of experience in children's entertainment, as I believe she voices Treefoo Tom for CBeebies, so she is very well suited to children's entertainment, as well as, obviously, the main show itself, so she just makes perfect sense as the lead for a child-centric Doctor Who spin-off. I should also probably point out at this point that just because obviously my spin-off ideas cater to certain demographics, that doesn't mean they're the only demographic that can enjoy those shows. So for example, I can imagine many classic fans enjoying the Ace spin-off, or New Who fans enjoying the Paul McGann 8th Doctor spin-off. I just thought it would be cool to like categorize them, I guess. Next up, I want to talk about a spin-off for maturer audiences, and this might not be what you expect, and this is probably one of my more wacky ideas. Master, a spin-off regarding the various hijinks of the character known as the Master, but rated mature, or rated R, not maybe R, but like 18. A maturer spin-off, basically somewhat in the vein of things like Joker and the Disney sort of villain origin story movies. Kind of like focusing on a sort of villainous anti-hero type thing with the Master as its central character. I think personally, the Master is kind of overplayed as the sort of campy villain to the Doctor thing. So I think a way of maybe giving the Master new life is to be able to actually show some of the things that we know the Master does that we'd never be able to see otherwise. I do picture Sacha Dhawan in this role. I think he makes the most sense. He's the one that's the most deranged, and I think he could play darker if he really wanted to. And this isn't even something that's that strange. Derek Jacobi leads his own series called War Master for Big Finish, and he's kind of the protagonist in that, so that isn't even that weird. Obviously, you've got things like Venom as well, where Venom's obviously a guy who eats people, but is still kind of the protagonist. And that would kind of be my pitch for the Master Show. There's not a lot of ideas I have for this one, unlike those other two that I mentioned, but I do think you could definitely elaborate on some of the ideas that are perhaps presented in the main show, like the idea of, you know, the Master being Rasputin for a bit in Power of the Doctor, like you could do an episode about that. And just the Master just causing chaos across the universe, I think would be a very fun show, and you could go places with that character that you'd never be able to go otherwise. So we've done our Classic Who spin-off, our Child spin-off, and our Mature spin-off. Now it's time for a Teenage spin-off, and I am going to go for Torchwood Reborn. Now, as some of you may know, I've been catching up on Torchwood recently, and I've been very much enjoying it. And I definitely think the concept of Torchwood itself, you know, the idea of this ragtag group of friends fighting aliens, you know, in Cardiff, is one that I definitely think has a lot of legs and a lot of personality to it. Obviously, there is the elephant in the room of Captain Jack Harkness, obviously because of the John Barrowman situation, which I don't want to get into much here, and hopefully not all the comments will be about that. But I think the best way to remedy this situation would be to have Freema Agyeman's Martha Jones lead a new Torchwood team, possibly with Gwen Cooper as well. As Martha Jones already has ties to Torchwood, and we know she's one of the few RTD companions left on Earth, so I think she makes the most sense to lead a new Torchwood team. I think you'd bring in the people who liked the original Torchwood and RTD era, as well as teens who want that sort of, you know, more gritty, ooh, look, guns Doctor Who spin-off, if you get what I'm trying to say. Does that make sense? I hope that made sense. But still maintaining some of the camp that we love from Torchwood. Now is finally time for my New Who spin-off, and my personal favourite pitch. Tales of Trenzalore. So this might take some explaining. There is a book called The Tales of Trenzalore, which follows the events of the 11th Doctor whilst he's on Trenzalore, awaiting his regeneration, protecting the town called Christmas. And personally, I think this is great grounds for a spin-off show. There's two main benefits to this show. Number one, it's set in one main location, the town called Christmas, so you wouldn't have to spend exorbitant amounts of money on different locations and different sets because it's all set in one place. On top of that, because of the inbuilt mechanic of the Doctor slowly aging through his time on Trenzalore, you could literally have Matt Smith come back at any time to do this show. He could be 45 or 85, doesn't matter, he could still technically do this show, and it would work really, really well. The way I would frame this is kind of, in the beginning of each episode, there would be like a title sequence that would zoom into the various pictures on the Doctor's wall in that little workshop that he has, and it basically recounts an adventure the Doctor had while on Trenzalore. So perhaps we could see the 11th Doctor fight Arachnos in one episode, or even you could do some wackier stuff with it, like give us another Dream Lord episode, or even Matt Smith faces the Master. Maybe even put him up against a different Master from a different era, like Sacha Dhawan, because many people think that they would play off well together. There are honestly so many things you could do with like a Tales of Trenzalore show, and it kind of baffles me that no one brings up this idea when Doctor Who spin-offs are mentioned, because personally I think it fits the spin-off mold perfectly. In terms of structure, this would probably be like an anthology mini-series, and you could even cover some of the grounds of like Time of the Doctor that perhaps the episode didn't really have time to delve into, like go maybe more into the Church of the Faithful mainframe, go more into the Time Lord's decision to give the Doctor the new regenerations, and yeah, I just think this would be a great spin-off. But let me know in the comments below what you think a great spin-off would be. Please like the video if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, and I will see you later.